I will leave that up to you.
I'll go first, so we're not just staring at each other. So Archival Issues is a regional journal published by the Midwest Archives Conference, or MAC. So that's a regional professional organization that serves archivists across, I think, 13 states. So it was first published in 1976 as the Midwestern Archivist, and then was rebranded as Archival Issues in 1992. So if everything goes well, we publish 2 issues a year, and we currently have an editorial board comprised of 8 people, including myself, and another board member who serves as the publication reviews editor. And we do, MAC also contracts with a professional copy editor and graphic designer who work on both the journal and the organization's newsletter.
I'm happy to go next. So the Journal of the Society of North Carolina Archivists was started in 2002, so it's pretty recent. When it first came out, it was published twice a year, and then kind of like 2014, 2015, it moved to once a year publication. We shifted online. Gosh, I didn't write that down. I'm trying to remember. I think 2017 or 2018, we shifted to fully online. And then with COVID, we had a very long tail. It took like 1.5 years to get an issue out. The latest issue came out in 2021, and there has not been one since. I resigned from managing editorship in 2021 after that issue came out. It was just a little too much on my plate. And so it's a small, just a state level journal. We do accept submissions from anywhere in the country, but it is a fully volunteer setup. So no one's getting paid. We don't contract with anyone to do the work. It's entirely in-house. So that definitely has some impacts on what gets focused on, especially after the past couple of years, things really being tossed up in the air.
Great. American Archivist has been publishing since 1938. Originally, it was published 4 times a year. Since 1998, it has been published twice a year. And in spring, summer of 2021, which was the first issue for which I was editor, that's volume 84, issue 1, the publication began to be published entirely in digital format. So up until that time, it had been a physical publication. It had some number of years of physical and digital format, and now it is an entirely digital format since spring summer 2021. I do want to say, if you're a reader, I'm going to pop a link in here to a survey that we are taking. The survey ends on March 1st, and this is a basically readership experience survey about your experience as readers of the digital format of American Archivist. The structure is similar. The editor oversees the editorial board. That includes myself, 2 reviews editors. But just this year, we started having reviews, 2 people working together on the reviews editorial position. And the reviews editors work together on the reviews portal, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then 12 editorial board members, individuals who serve as volunteers from the organization. We also rely on a pool of peer reviewers who are volunteers from the membership. And if you want to register as a peer reviewer, I'll just pop a link in there too. We do work with peer reviewers. All of those positions are volunteer. SAA does a lot of the layout and work to mostly the layout work. They contract with a copy editor who works closely with us as we're getting material ready. And the editor is a paid position, but all of the editorial board is volunteer service. I think that's it for right now.
All right, very good. So for people listening, let's think for a minute here about scope, just so for comparison's sake, then we'll know I'm more like Brandon or I'm more like Kristen. So for each of you, what is the scope of your audience and also the scope of your writers? So are you focused mainly on your own organization, or both in terms of readership and in terms of who is writing for you? Are you looking beyond your own organization to other folks?
I'll start with that because the scope of American Archivist is extremely broad. It really looks for an audience that is actually not only national, but we also then have overlap with writers and readers in Canada. Currently, we are developing a special section of the journal on Middle East and North African archives. So there is an international reach, although Comma is an international journal, which is edited by Bethany Anderson. So basically, American Archivist, as it states, seeks to reflect thinking about theoretical and practical developments in the archival profession, the relationships between archivists and creators and the users of archives, and cultural, social, legal, and technological developments that affect the nature of recorded information and the need to create and maintain it. That is the goal of the journal writ large. It supports the mission of the organization, it supports the core values of our profession, and it supports our vision as professionals.
I can go next. So, I mean, Archival Issues is produced by a regional organization, but in terms of readership and authorship, I guess it's technically international, but it's really primarily the US, and we do have some subscribers and authors mainly from Canada, but we also have institutional subscribers across the world. I know we have one in South Korea that was really concerned when we decided to do away with the print issue, because that's something that they were expecting. But at the same time, I think that we always try and make sure that the content that we publish and the journal itself is relevant to MAC members of the regional organization. So when we decided to do away with the print journal, we were thinking about it. The first thing we did was survey the MAC members, to see, how are they, kind of similar to the survey that Amy just shared in the chat, but focus specifically on how they're engaging with the journal and the newsletter, whether they're reading the digital or the print, and it's basically just asking them, would they continue to keep their membership and to read the journal if we decided to go all digital. So, and I think that, I mean, in terms of scope, like, I think our official statement is we focus on issues, challenges, and concerns confronting contemporary archivists. So super vague. We also do touch on allied fields, a little bit on records management. We've published articles on oral history, or like special collections, librarianship issues, things like that. But we also encourage new professionals, first-time authors to submit. And usually around the time MAC has its annual meeting, sometimes I'll reach out to people who had a compelling presentation at the annual meeting to see if they'd be interested in turning that into a publication. So.
Yeah, so I would say our scope, well, the origins of the journal was kind of to create a publishing avenue for members of SNCA who might have that as part of their job expectations, but might find it harder to get into like a niche, like the SAA journal. And so that's kind of the origins of it. But we do have, we've had authors from all over the country And we also do try to encourage student and young professional submissions. We had the organization, SNCA has a annual scholarship that is for grad students to submit a paper, and the selected paper always gets published in the JSNCA issue. And so that is, you know, so we have kind of that, some of those level of submissions. And so our scope is pretty like heavily focused on North Carolina. It's a lot of case studies of projects done by institutions around the state. And so while we welcome, you know, a wide readership, it is pretty heavily focused on our membership and what folks in North Carolina are going to be interested in the profession.
All right, so considering that each of your publications has made that transition from only print to the digital realm, what led you to make those decisions? You know, what were some of the factors involved in that? You know, and both what went into the decision, and then also what sorts of feedback have you gotten, positive or negative?
Okay, I can go first for this. So similar to what Brandon and Amy said about surveying the membership, that was our first step, was doing a survey of the membership to see how they felt about it. Kind of the reasoning behind it was the thought that maybe it would help with a faster turnaround for a publication. I don't know if that's really borne itself out, but that was the thought. It was that, and then also distribution to the membership was expensive for mailing things, and so we just thought we could maybe save a little money by going purely online. So that was kind of the reasoning. We did a survey. Folks seemed fine with it for the most part. We found mostly it was institutional members who were reluctant about this shift, just an expectation that they'd get an issue to put on the shelf was going to be going away. We already had been, our journal is indexed by EBSCO, so that already was in place before we made the shift to digital. But that was kind of our reasoning for how we did it. And we are just purely open access. We just publish on our website. We're not behind any paywall or anything like that.
So I can go next. So we had been producing a print and an electronic journal. I think we'd been putting the digital version on the MAC website behind the member login since I think 2012. So we're used to doing two different versions. We've, you know, I think we noticed other organizations, other archival journals were talking about moving to digital only or had already done that. And then I would say that the COVID-19 pandemic kind of sealed the deal for us. We had a lot of delays in production and shipping of the print journal in 2020 and 2021. And we started having conversations in 2021. Myself, our publications coordinator, who's on the MAC Council, Daria Levinsky, and our newsletter editor, Adriana Harmeyers, who's actually seen on the call. We started having a conversation about what it would look like to make that transition. And then we surveyed the members. They seemed okay with it. We surveyed our institutional subscribers to see what they would think. They were okay with that. So we put together a proposal for the MAC leadership to move to digital only by the end of that year of 2021, and it was approved, and we printed our last issue I think in December of 2021. And one thing we did before that kind of was just a coincidence. In 2020, MAC partnered with Iowa State University to make the journal open access through their digital press website. So we actually, starting in 2020, the second issue of 2020, we started assigning Creative Commons licenses to all of our articles so that we didn't have to, we could provide immediate access to those, at least the digital version, without an embargo. So I think that also kind of contributed to the decision to go to digital only.
For American Archivist, the American Archivist had been providing digital access simultaneously since the early 2000s. The journal was a print publication, obviously, from 38 all the way to spring, summer 2021, the 84 one, when the publication began digital only. But the organization actively was working well before that to create digital access to the back issues. And so when we went to an all digital alternative, it was a move that was really based on the needs of the organization. A lot of that was based on cost saving measures. And it was a decision that was really undertaken by council to meet the needs of SAA as an organization. But it was something that we had been doing for some time already.
So it's sounding like the financial aspects of it were certainly important. And several of you mentioned sort of the institutional pushback. Any other pushback, or everybody else seems pretty excited about the transition to digital?
Well, that's one of the reasons that we're getting this survey out there, is just to see what the reader experience is with the digital environment. You know, I think that it's important to, in a digital world, it's important to make sure that people don't kind of cruise over it and delete it out of your inbox, right? Because it's really easy to say, oh yeah, I'll get to that later. So like I say, that's one of the reasons we've been all digital for 2 years now, and it's time to really kind of understand how people are engaging with that. You know, when we were preparing for a transfer to all digital, there have been 2 digital platforms that American Archivist has been on in online. Each was evaluated by and selected by a committee that included members of the editorial board as well as members of the readership. So the readership has always been, we've always tried to keep people aware of that digital progression. And when we went all digital, it didn't involve a change in platform. So that really helped us in the fact that readers didn't have to adjust to a new platform. They did several years earlier, and that was kind of, there was a ruffle on that one. I was involved in the selection of both of the digital platforms, so I've seen kind of the clunkiness of both of those.
So that raises another interesting question. So if somebody listening to this is thinking about making this transition into digital, then what are some of the other things that they need to do to prepare? Obviously, thinking about digital platform is one of the things that y'all have raised. Are there other things that you would like to point to that are important considerations?
I think that it's not something that we've gotten around to addressing yet, but one of the, in addition to the cost saving and the simplifying the production process, one of the things that we talked about in our proposal to MAC Council was the kind of the possibility to make the publication more accessible. So I mean, right now we're still producing a PDF and we're putting it into the Iowa State repository, but we are looking at some other systems to provide a more interactive experience for folks that are using screen readers and things like that. And just rethinking our general production process in terms of like, we're still, our graphic designer is still typesetting it as if it were going to be printed. It's just a little bit different. We don't have to worry about doing a color versus a black and white version. We can make links dynamic, things like that, but kind of not defaulting to just the PDF and putting it online. If you can do that, that's great, but especially for posterity, but trying to find a way that, and I think SAA has done this well, Archival Issues, trying to find a platform that kind of does a good job of recreating the experience of reading a print publication, like being able to flip pages and things like that. So I think just being open to new possibilities.
I would absolutely agree with that. And that's a conversation that's gone on in the editorial board, is how can we leverage the dynamic of an online publication and really look towards accessibility, access to already, the thing that I think most authors have commented on is can we print color? Can we have our charts in color? Yes, you can. Online, active links show up. It isn't. So there's some really immediate benefits, but absolutely the ongoing efforts are to really leverage the power of digital publication and see how that can impact the reader experience for sure.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. We too are basically still just producing a PDF that's designed for sending to a printer. And so there was grand ideas that when this idea was first proposed, like how can this be more dynamic? Can we be publishing articles kind of as they roll in and get finished versus, putting it all out at once? These were all ideas we had that would make this more beneficial, and nothing's come to fruition yet. But finding a good way to do that and trying to take advantage of that would definitely be things to think about. But when we made the initial switch, it was just like, let's just get it online and then see what happens. And it hasn't really moved beyond that yet.
Yeah, we've also talked about moving away from, 2 issues a year, because a lot of times, most of our issues only have 3 or 4 articles in them, and it seems like there's always 1 or 2 that's ready to go on time, and you're kind of waiting on the third. So being able to dynamically push those out there, and I know some other archival journals have started doing that. They'll just, they'll publish 1 article and say it's ready, which I kind of appreciate. So we've been talking about that as well.
It's a question in the survey for us. How do you want to access content? Do you want to access it on a rolling basis? Are you interested in chunks of content that we tend to get when we think of specific volumes and issues? So it's a question for us too.
So obviously a lot of this is still a learning process, even for the 3 of you, but I'm curious, are there things that you found about publishing digitally that are easier than the old print way of doing things? And then the flip side too, are there things that are maybe even unexpectedly harder in the digital realm?
Oh, I think that a lot of the fact that we are currently looking at it as a volume issue production, and so you still have some of that. You still have a lot of the infrastructure that goes around containing material in one specific volume and issue, providing that material to the copy editor, getting it back to the authors for all of the revision and approval process. I mean, there's a lot of back work that goes on that doesn't disappear regardless of whether you are in a digital format or in a print format. You still have quality control, you still have revisions, copy editing, reviews, all of these kinds of things. But I think that the real benefits accrue to making people aware of content, to access, to sharing content with multiple audiences. It's great to be able to put that in an email, but also to be able to put it on Twitter. Hey, here's the new issue of American Archivist. Hey, and also I will say, we're currently expanding the scope of the reviews portal. So the reviews for American Archivist were initially print reviews in the journal. Some years ago, when I took over as reviews editor, we developed the reviews portal, which was an opportunity to do more of this continual publishing model where we would post reviews in essentially on a portal where people could access them more quickly. And right now, we're very excited that the first article in a series called Intergenerational Conversations has just been published, just out. And if you go to the SAA Reviews portal, you will, I'll find it and post it in the chat. But you know, the work still goes on in the background, but I think that the real exciting opportunities are some of these access tools and the dynamic structure that we have available.
Yeah, I would say it's it's made things a lot easier in terms of especially printing, logistics for printing and shipping out. What was the print journal? It's also kind of things you don't think about, like obsessing about the final typeset version, making sure there are no typos, because if you find a mistake, it's much easier to correct. We had from a couple issues past, and I think it may have been the last one that was printed, but an author, I think the name of their institution had been not misspelled, but something was incorrect. So we were able to fix that and put a correction notice in the online version. We didn't have to print a correction notice in the next issue, which is kind of standard procedure. One of the unexpected things, and this wasn't so much the switch to digital, it was the switch to open access, is that we saved a lot of money by switching to digital only in terms of printing and shipping costs, but we kind of didn't really think a whole lot about how our institutional subscribers that are members of MAC, just so that they could get the print journal or get access to the digital version, would realize that they no longer need to do that because it's open access. So I think we kind of, I don't know if we broke even, but it really changed the financial equation as far as that goes. But that was kind of unexpected. We definitely thought about the cost we'd be saving, but we didn't think about things like that. And advertising revenue is another thing that we're trying to figure out how that is impacted by the move to digital only.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely easier not having to deal with the publisher and getting it physically out and distributing it. That was the thing that was a lot of work, and prepping it and all that. I don't know numbers as far as if it's impacted membership or anything like that. We have pretty low costs already for membership, and I feel like, at least speaking personally, they send a nice reminder right around the time our conference is, and then it impacts, you know, how much the conference has cost. And so usually I think that's where membership is rolling in better for us. But yeah, and I'm just seeing someone asked a question about tracking analytics. Not that I know of, I don't think we have done that, and that's a great idea. Again, I have stepped back from this position, so I don't know what conversations are happening now, but we haven't done any of that, I don't think.
American Archivist does have some analytics tracking. We share out with the editorial board kind of what is the being read, but you can also see a lot of that on the SAA website. On the they track what's being read, and they post that to the membership. So there is some of that information that gets out there. We're also just currently trying to have conversations in the editorial board about what analytics would be most useful for us as we continue to go forward, and how we want to, especially in a digital environment, how we want to make sure that people are engaging with us, hence the survey.
Yeah, we have a relatively new online repository. I think it does have analytics built into it, but we haven't really been doing that regularly. For years, we've been contributing digital issues to JSTOR with a slight embargo. And I can pull down quarterly reports from there as far as views and things like that. And that's something that gets reported to MAC Council, but we haven't really been doing that systematically with the new website yet.
So one sort of tangential issue, we've talked some about the digital platforms. So in terms of the digital preservation access piece of this, I'm curious if there are long-term plans. Like for a lot of organizations, I know print publications would get deposited at a repository so that there would be long-term access in that sense. Is there an equivalent of that for the digital realm, or is it just through website, digital platform, whatever is being used at the time?
So we have a collection that, like a institutional, or the organization's papers are at the State Archives, North Carolina State Archives, and a copy of the journal has always gone there. I honestly don't know the last time things were transferred, but I know I have all like copies of the PDF ready to go with other files to transfer to them as well. But I don't know that we've actually done a born digital transfer of things over to them in a while. So, but that I believe would be the plan for that. But right now, I admit that's like all sitting on a really nice hard drive on my desk at work.
For American Archivists, in a certain respect, the platform serves as a content repository because it's open access with the exception of the articles for the 3 most recent volumes. Front matter and book reviews are open access for all issues, and so Meridian through Allen Press, which I just popped into the chat, is really where you can access all of the journal's content. The archives of the Society of American Archivists are held at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and there is a series there for American Archivists. That's something that I need to go back to the archivists there and just talk with them about the digital content, because I know that there's material. They have an online finding aid. There's a lot of paper stuff, but I'm unsure of where the digital material stands. And we also do have content on JSTOR and have a Creative Commons license. So there are a lot of places where you can actively find it.
Yeah, so the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee is also the repository for the records of the Midwest Archives Conference. So we were sending them print copies of archival issues. And up until 2016, we were putting digital or digitized 2 copies. So our entire background of going back to 76 has been digitized and is available through their institutional repository, which is backed up. For whatever reason, I think they made the decision not to do that anymore. And we switched to the digital publishing platform with Iowa State. So anything since 2016 is physically in that repository. And then for issues prior to that, we actually link out to the UW Milwaukee site. So through the new ISU platform, all the content or all the metadata for all the content is there, but some of it physically lives on a different site.
All right, so before we transition to talk about writer engagement, any other things about digital publications that I have neglected to ask you that you want to make sure our audience hears about? And feel free, some of you are already posting questions in the chat, but definitely everybody feel free to add things there If you have things you want to ask, and in a few minutes, maybe we can let you unmute yourselves as well. But I still have a couple of things that I'm eager to ask. So, several of you have already touched on it in terms of sort of intentions or hopes, aspirations, I guess, for this transition and what it would mean for your authors as well as for your readers. So I'm curious what writer engagement looks like in the digital world, with the acknowledgement that COVID maybe has blurred all of these lines and makes it a little bit more difficult to evaluate, perhaps. But generally, is your sense that the digital platform makes it easier to attract authors, harder, the same? Anything about that transition that stands out to you?
I don't know that it's made a huge difference for us. It has been, for us, a real struggle for submissions for the past, even pre-COVID. That was part of the reason there was a shift to the once a year publication. It's just hard to get them in. And I don't know how much of that is, a lot of our content was kind of folks talking about projects they did, and so many places now are, doing project blogs and stuff like that, have all these ways of disseminating that information other ways. But yeah, I don't know that it's made a difference for us going digital. It hasn't made it easier, I guess. I don't know that it's necessarily made it harder.
Yeah, we're in a similar position. I think anytime you're a smaller academic or professional journal, if you're regional or state, it's always challenging to get quality submissions on a regular basis. Lately for us, it's really been feast or famine as far as the number of submissions. We received quite a few in the last year, but prior to the year before that, not a whole lot. And I think COVID was a big part of that. People were starting to rethink their priorities. And like Kristen said, when you're working from home doing, not all the projects that you would normally be doing if you were on site, it kind of limits what you can write about. One thing that did help us, our new repository is like an integrated publishing platform. So we were able to get a system for automated submissions of new article manuscripts. Before it was just, email the editor or anyone on the board for that matter. But now we have a system in place that makes that easier. I think that's helped. But other than that, I don't think the actual move to digital has really impacted the number of submissions a whole lot, but it's hard to tell because the timing overlaps with, the last 3 years, which have been crazy in a lot of ways.
I absolutely agree that COVID has had an impact on how people are thinking about writing and what people are writing and what people are writing about. And the actual work that is involved in writing and revising and working through an article definitely has changed, I think, over the last couple of years. With that said, American Archivist is always trying to engage with authors in a lot of different ways, and so as the editor, I am willing to speak to anybody at any time about an article or an idea. We definitely are seeing fewer submissions, but we are seeing a good number of submissions. And I think that the shift in the way that people are thinking about writing articles, you see a lot more jointly authored articles, you see a lot of collaborative projects, and that's terrific. I also like to try to reach out to new authors, people who may be intimidated, by intimidated by the writing process, or think, I don't really have that much to offer. Well, you do. And so I like to encourage people to get started by signing up for a peer review process, to become become a part of that, to publish in the reviews portal, to contact the reviews editors and work on writing a review. And we've even had reviews that are co-authored. So there are all kinds of ways to get involved. SAA also has Archival Outlook, which is not a peer-reviewed journal, but Archival Outlook allows, and I know, the MAC newsletter also publishes really quality, articles about archival practice and what we're doing in the field. And so there's just a lot of opportunity out there for authors to engage the literature and to think about what you might contribute. It doesn't all have to be an intimidating process. It is very, very collaborative. And like I say, even scholarly research articles, I'm constantly talking to people about, hey, what about this? What about that? What ideas do you have? So, and I think all of us as editors, probably, I see a lot of head shaking. We all do that.
One thing just to add on to that, that COVID kind of shifted was a real way of cultivating authors was at our annual conference. And I know Brandon talked about this, if someone did a really interesting presentation, to kind of say, oh, do you want to write up about that and submit to the journal? And that kind of one-on-one interaction in person has been lost for the past few years because we haven't had any in-person conferences. And so for such a small, state journal, that definitely, I think, has had an impact, that relationship building that can happen at different events around the state, they haven't been happening. And so that's kind of been lost and hopefully will come back over the next year or so, but that definitely has had an impact too.
So Amy mentioned noticing that more people are submitting group authored pieces instead of individuals. Any other trends that you notice, either in terms of how people are writing or even topics that seem to be more common in these days?
I've noticed more articles where folks are talking about kind of innovative outreach projects beyond, just exhibits and instruction and things like that. I know a couple of years ago, we had an article about some archivists that had created a podcast to highlight some of the things in their collection. And also, looking at the role of archivists and archival institutions and community archiving initiatives and what that actually looks like, and how you can kind of balance the needs of the institution with the communities that you're working with.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of conversation going on right now in the archival literature, and that really is what we're talking about. Is the archival literature is a conversation. Our journals do not exist in a vacuum. We read each other, we speak to each other, people use multiple journals in multiple ways, and so. You see a lot of conversation going on right now around social justice, around community archives, around archives and power dynamics, or archives in the public good. All of these are really, really interesting discussions. And in the last issue of American Archivist and in the upcoming issue of American Archivist, we're working with the A Census 2 survey. So there's kind of a lot of self-reflection on archivists as professionals and what our profession looks like right now, and where our relationship with other parts of the profession are going, and how they have been formed. The interesting thing to me is that a lot of the conversations that we're having right now really sprang up in the late 1990s with conversations about archives, social memory, archives in the public good, archives and power. And that these conversations that we're having in the literature right now have this long, really rich thread. And that is a thread not just in the American Archivist, but it is a thread across all of our publications, which is fantastic and something to really think about.
Yeah, I don't know that I would agree, or I would agree with seeing more trends of more kind of multiple authors and kind of cross-institutional collaboration. And then in our last issue, which we kind of had like a COVID focus, like how did your organization shift for COVID, and a lot of thoughtful outreach about how you do it digitally and that sort of thing was talked about.
Okay, so my last question then, are there any voids in our profession scholarship? Are there topics that, you know, obviously you three have spent more time than probably most people in knowing what's out there. So are there things that you think should be out there that have not yet been addressed by archival scholarship?
I don't think it's so much a topical issue, but a kind of a representation issue. I think that it's not a coincidence that I believe all three of us work for fairly large universities. But getting more perspectives from folks that work in other environments, you know, public libraries, historical societies, county, municipal government archives, things like that, is something that I really like to see and try and foster. And I know it's hard to find the time and the institutional support when you work in those environments to work on conference presentations and publications, and even, you know, service in publications and things like that. But I think that's probably one thing that I've seen is that, and I think it's getting a lot better, but at the same time, it's a moving target.
Yeah, I would agree with Brandon. Definitely, if you're outside of a large university, it's like it's hard enough for me to find time to do this. I mean, I had to say I can't do it anymore. And I used to work at a public library, and you know, my boss was really great. You know, we were large by public library standards, that I was able to have some time to work on this at my job, but that's really rare, and the schedules that folks in those kind of places and the duties they have can be overwhelming. So, but it would be great to hear their voice, because they're on the ground really a lot more than a lot of us up in the ivory tower. So, yeah.
I'm going to echo that. I think it's really important for us to have for that conversation to include all of the types of repositories that we as a profession represent. I really love to see people engaging all of these topics in the literature. I think it's been great to see people talking about more outreach opportunities based on, you know, creative responses to COVID. So I'm seeing a question here, a fair amount of autonomy and content, or do you have to report to your larger organization? As far as American Archivists go, there is autonomy in content. It's council gets a report on what we're publishing, but they don't come to us and say, you need to publish this. So yeah, we look for great submissions, and we work with people to try and help them get there.
Yeah, I would echo that. As far as archival issues, we're a little bit different in that we don't have external peer reviewers, so the editorial board is making the peer review decisions. So it's really up to the 7 of the 8 board members who review the articles to make the decision. And I've never had a member of MAC Council, you know, express concerns about content or anything like that. And I've been involved with the journal in some capacity since 2017, I think. So a lot of support.
Yeah, same. As sometimes the the admin board for the Society of North Carolina Archivists might suggest like, oh, a topic call this year on this topic could be interesting. And sometimes if we have no ideas, it's like, yeah, that sounds great. But as far as like submissions and what gets published, that's handled entirely by the editorial board. We also our peer reviewers are internal to the editorial board as well.
Peer review is double blind. That is, the peer reviewers don't know who's reviewing their manuscript, and authors don't know whose manuscript they're reviewing. The reports to council from myself as editor, the reports to council from the editorial board and editorial board responses often published on the SAA website, so you can always go there. Translating articles from other national level journals. Archival, I would love to see more global perspectives as well. I think that there have been a few translations, but it is, I think it's difficult to do. I think that there has been some conversation about translations around the MENA Archives special section that we're doing as well.
So I thank people for those questions in the chat. Anybody want to unmute yourself and ask a question here as we wrap up? Any other closing words of wisdom the three of you have to share for anybody who's trying to publish in the archival world?
I would say don't be afraid to get in touch with one of us or another editor of a different journal. Even if you have an idea, like a kernel of an idea for a topic, I've got a running spreadsheet of folks that have reached out to me with ideas, and I've kind of encouraged them, and I try to follow up with them periodically. But yeah, don't be afraid, even if you don't have time to work on a manuscript this year, if you've got an idea for something that you think would be valuable. And also if you have an idea and you don't want it to be a full-fledged, scholarly article with a lit review and all that stuff. I know that both SAA and MAC have newsletters that publish kind of abbreviated versions of what are essentially articles that are a lot of times more practical and applied. So, and then there are also blogs that I think a lot of institutions or a lot of organizations support as well. So don't be afraid to get in touch with somebody, and they might hand you off to somebody else and say, this is a more appropriate venue, but we're happy to help.
I absolutely agree with that. We as a profession create our own literature, and I think it's really important for us to realize that we all have the ability to contribute to that literature. We all have a voice, and we all have something worthwhile to say. So don't hesitate.
Yeah, and my only input is that I had no editorial background whatsoever when I took over it. Sometimes you just have to step up and try it out. You can handle a lot more than you might think. So.
All right, well, I definitely want to thank Kristen and Brandon and Amy for your time and for sharing all of your experience. I think we've learned a lot about what your organizations and publications have done, and hopefully that will be of benefit to the participants here today and to anyone else who watches this later. But definitely let's continue this conversation with each other through the Regional Archival Associations Consortium and anywhere else that we may run into each other. So thank you all for your time today. Hope you have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Thank you.